Right. Okay, I've got someone on each side. Okay, all right, let's go. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the follow-up session from last week, which is the SB20 Australia in Conversation series, Tuning and SB20. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet tonight, and here in Hobart, the Moonina people, and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. It gives me great pleasure to welcome back Doyle Sails and Australian Sailing's Andrew Lechte and Darren Twirler Jones. Andrew and Twirler have kindly agreed to join us again due to the popularity of last week's session. We've had quite a lot of great feedback and views of our recorded session. So I'm really pleased that Andrew and Darren have made themselves available to come and talk to us again tonight. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to World Champion Sailor Nick Rogers. Nick certainly needs no introduction in Australia, but for our international guests, let me give you a snapshot of Nick's sailing career. He's won 45 international and national regattas, has been runner-up 20 times, which gives him, with his, I guess, the occasional third place, Nick, a total of 77 podium places. A highlight for Nick was winning the World International Dragon Championship, and Nick is currently the Masters and Corinthian World Champion in the Dragons. Nick narrowly missed out on selection to represent Australia in the 2000 Olympics in the sailing class. He's been coaching at a state and national level for the past 40 years and was a national umpire in match racing and teams racing. Nick introduced the SB20 class to Tasmania in 2010. Nick's one of the driving forces behind the class, and in Australia we have one of the largest fleets located in the same place in the world. Welcome to you, Nick. I'd also like to welcome back Andy Roberts, who's co-hosting with me tonight, and a couple of extra shout-outs. It's great to see and to welcome Jan Truon from Belgium to tonight's session. Thanks very much for joining us. Great to see you online, and Ed Russo, the former World Council President. Great to see you online as well, Ed. So tonight's session is going to focus on putting last week's theory into practice. I know that Twirler in his downtime has been brushing up on his eWhiteboard skills and is raring to go with that tonight. As always, we really do want to have your questions answered. So if you've got some questions, please post them on the chat. You can make them available to everyone or just to me, that's fine. We don't often get these opportunities to have such, intense conversations about SB20 sailing. So please do that. We really want you to have your questions answered. As always, the session is recording and it's posted on the SB20 Australia YouTube channel, so you can check those, all the sessions out. Plus the slides from last week or last fortnight there's a link available on our SB20 Australia Facebook page, and if you're having trouble with that, I can email those directly to you. So we thank Andrew for letting those letting us share those slides. Okay, enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Andrew, who's going to just give us a quick 2-minute summary of last week's session before we then start to explore some of those key themes, with the main focus tonight just being turning that theory into practice. Andrew, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Jane. So I think, just to summarise a bit on last week, where I wanted to get was just basically to just describe what we're looking for in terms of sail shape. So, as I've said, not every SB20 sail is the same. So, but what we're looking for is pretty common for different wind strengths. So, in 6 knots, we're looking to get as much drive as we can out of the jib. So we're looking for a deep shape, and the deeper shape needs a little bit more twist. The mainsail you want to have pretty flat because if the mainsail is too deep, it'll stall really easily. So that combination of deep jib and flat main gives you pointing, and that is generally sort of gives you the best result in the light weather. When you get to 10 knots, you've pretty much full power. because the flow of the sails is a bit quicker, it won't tend to stall as easily. So you can actually, 10 knots is probably when you trim the firmest on both the jib and the main. You're still looking for power because your boat's still not at maximum roll moment. So you've still got a powerful jib, but your main's trimmed extremely firm, probably a little deeper than 6 knots. Then when you get up to, if we had another 4 knots of breeze, we're up at 14 knots, we're just starting to get overpowered. And what we want to do is lose some depth out of the top of the rig so that we lower the center of effort. We do this by mostly by twist, but also by flattening off the top of the sails as well. So, you know, for the jib, you might go a little bit, maybe lower the jib down a little bit if you can, and with the mainsail, you'll start using backstay because that's the best way to bend the top of the rig. And then when we get to 18 knots, another 4 knots again, we're really overpowered in these boats, and we just want to really, like, we're not using the top of the sails at all. So we just want them to be super flat so that they're a very low drag state. But we need enough depth in the bottom of the main so that we can still point and that the mainsail shape's still stable. And with the jib, we're, you know, depending on how the mainsail's setting up in the sea state, we might change the sheeting angle a little bit, going a little more outboard if we can't get the main settled down. And again, we don't want to lose all the power out of the bottom of the jib because we're driving off the bottom part of the sail, where it's having the least effect on your riding moment. But we certainly want to lose the depth out of the top of the sail, and we can do that with a little bit of tack tension, or a fair bit actually, because that helps flatten the sail and it helps the top twist. So that's a kind of basic summary of what we're looking for shape, and just depending on how your sails are, you know, you might have to use different ways to achieve those shapes. So there we have it. Over
Great.
to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Darren, I think we're over to you now. You're
unmute. Yeah, look, I'll follow up on what Andrew said, and one of the big things that I think people have to understand in this class, and in any one design class where you can't change anything, is that not only are the sails different, but the boats and the rigs are different, and it can be anywhere from forestay lengths to spreader poke to spreader angle to sail shapes to anything. And I will bring up the whiteboard here now just to run over a few things in respect to the. Let's do the sails first, just to make sure that people understand and they know why this sort of thing happens. Oh, here we go. So when you make a sail, and especially a panelled sail in the case of an SB20, what normally happens is you get a piece of cloth that's like this, and all the fibres and the yarns and the strength of the yarn all run down this way in the warp direction, and there's some fill fibres that run this way, and I'm not sure, I can't remember in this case the SB20s, and then they have a scrim lay that goes on that creates X's like this to give it some support in the 45-degree angle direction, and sometimes that can change as well. The biggest issue with, I'll try and figure out how to do this, here we go. The biggest issue with a piece of sailcloth is that sometimes when it gets laminated, you can get a soft spot in the middle. So you might get, like, for instance, if you lay a piece of cloth out on the floor and it should sit flat, but the way it's constructed, the way it's laminated, the way the heat goes through it, sometimes you can get a loose edge down here, and maybe it's symmetric and you get another loose edge over here. And then possibly you might even get a loose edge in the middle. What's for sure is that when the sailmaker, what they call is nesting up all the panels, they make all the panels in here like this, and then they make another one like this, and then they make maybe another panel like this, and again like this, and this is like all these panels here eventually get cut out and they go into join each other. But what happens is if you cut a straight line down here through the middle of the cloth, then all of a sudden you've got two pieces of cloth that should be parallel like that. But what happens is, if I can get rid of all this again, what happens is that if you've got a loose spot in the middle, this piece of cloth here on this side that got cut down the middle goes like this. And this piece over here that had the loose spot as well goes like this. So if there was a panel nested on this edge here and cut out that was supposed to have like maybe 1 millimeter of shape in it, and let's say that this distance between here and here was 2 millimeters, all of a sudden this edge of the panel, sorry about my drawing.
Doing well.
All of a sudden this edge of the panel that was supposed to have 1 millimeter of positive shape in it has 2 millimeters of negative shape in it. And then so as you can imagine, if you stuck two negatives together, it becomes 4 millimeters of negative shape rather than 2 millimeters of positive shape. And that's basically the reason why all the sails are a little bit different. It's not the manufacturer's fault. It's not the person who sticks it together. They normally do a reasonably good job over the basis of the whole sail. But it's the problem with the sailcloth when they get it from the manufacturer. And that's why all the sails come out a little tiny bit different from one to the other. So if all these negatives, for instance, were on the luff curve side of the sail, and people were just cutting down a line that was drawn on the plotter, then the sail, one sail to the next, could have anywhere between 4 and 6 millimeters difference in luff curve. And of course, as we know, when we look at the sails on the boat, and what Andrew showed last week, is that the difference in the depth of the sail then from 4 to 6 millimeters is quite a lot. Now I'll just try and get out of here again. Oh, how do I lose this screen? Here we go. Stop share. So, you know, and it's not, as I said, it's not the fault of anyone except for the fact that manufacturers are only able to deal with the product that they're given. Andrew, your thoughts on that?
I think you're on mute there, Andrew. I'll just unmute you.
Oh, okay, there we are. Yeah, so yeah, totally agree, Darren. And it's not just the SB class that has these issues. You know, that at the moment, the 49er and FX classes, which are the highest Olympic sort of standard, the tender's out for that at the moment for the next lot of, the next Olympiad sails. And it's because they've basically, it just seems like no matter how much care is taken of putting the sails together carefully, there's just issues with that heavy film. I think they use like 6 mil mylar, and the more plastic there is in these sails, the worse they are for trying to get those edges consistent. So totally agree. And it's not just upwind sails too. Downwind, we're mostly using nylon, and nylon, one of the characteristics of it is that it will still absorb moisture. So even very small changes in the humidity while the sail's being built can have quite big effects on the shape, because it can change even when you're joining the sails. When you put the seam stick on the panels, there's enough moisture in the seam stick that if it's left for an hour, it changes the length of that panel, because just from the humidity or the moisture from the seam stick. So yeah, And with the SB20, you know, for sure I've seen some pretty big differences there. So all we're trying to do, there is big differences, and what we're trying to do still though is when I've looked at sails out in the water, most people manage to trim that out, and I think that's what hopefully you know, Darren will talk a little bit about how, you know, what tools we have available with the trimming to get some of those differences out of the sails.
Yeah. So I'll go back to I'll go back to the whiteboard again. Now let's go. So I'll go to the rig. What I'm going to do is basically this is the mast. We've got two sets of spreaders. The top set of spreaders up here, I'm going to leave out. So we've got our cap shrouds which go through here. We've got our lowers that go to the base of the bottom spreader, and we've got our gooseneck wires that go to the end of the boom. For me, there was a couple of questions before about cap shroud length and sorry, and cap shroud lengths and whatnot in the tuning guide. Again, we'll switch over to the actual rigging now, but long story short is that all the rigging is not of equal length. So especially the forestays, which, you know, obviously make a difference to the load on the rudder and how much you wind down or not wind down the cap shrouds. But so when you say in the tuning guide, or when the tuning guide says, okay, well, maybe you should set your shrouds at like this number, I guess the whole point of this conversation is going to be is that you've got to deal with a little bit of seat of the pants sailing. I mean, I've seen forestays that have been up to maybe 10 or 12 millimeters difference in length. Nick, you might chime in here. I'm sure you've measured a lot. Do you think that that's reasonable to say that?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. The standard measurement is 7.7 metres, and I've found that most of them are on that spot. Some of them about 5 mil. Very rare do you get any more than 5, maybe the odd 1 or 2.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway, you continue on.
So for me, Jesus, sorry. For me, the ultimate measurement in an SB20 is the loose gauge tension on the cap shrouds on here. And that's really the only thing for me that you can set up. And the reason why I say that is because the lower tension and the gooseneck shrouds down here, they're totally determined on the luff curve in your mainsail. And as we just discussed, the luff curve in the mainsails and the sails can change shape randomly. It's not the fault of the manufacturer or anything. It's the way the cloth's produced and the way they're nested up and whatnot, but that can happen. So for that reason, I've seen lowers that you know, on different mainsails and stuff that we've used gone anywhere from between 16 on their loose gauge to maybe 30. And then the gooseneck shrouds is another kettle of fish that you basically set up to allow for your vang to sheet against the mast when you're vang sheeting, and not have the sail over bend. But again, from one mainsail to the other, these little puppies down here can change up to 2 or 3 turns depending on the sail that you've got up at the time. So you really have to be quite open as to how you feel that the conditions are going and how the mainsail's looking on your mast, and how whether you got bumpy water, flat water, as to this little baby here and this little baby here. But the cap shroud tension, you can set up as a base number. Let's say it's 32 or 34, or it's always going to be in that ballpark. And then and then the other two are going to be a lot more by feel. How they work is, and how I like to set it up is that the first thing is, again, here's the rig, here's a spreader, here's a cap shroud, here's a lower, and here's your gooseneck wires. The big issue with the SB20 is that this is all one, except for the lowers, I think except for the gooseneck wires, it's all 1x19 wire. And this length from here to here obviously is double this length from here to here, and definitely gets double the stretch. There's a few things with the rig that you need to sort out. One is, in certain conditions, you need gust response. And by that, I mean that you need to be loaded up on the D1 here. And then if that's loaded up with half the stretch, then the cap shroud here is going to stretch enough so that the mast in a gust, especially from this point here, will tip out of the boat like that. And in most cases, especially in gusty conditions, and it's going to be like, let's say, for instance, you're sailing with a maximum crew weight of 270, you probably want to have this sort of tip lay off. So that means that to get that sort of tip lay off in a gust, you would want the cap shroud tighter than if you were, say, 250 kilos. Because depending on your crew weight, if you were 250 kilos, the one thing you don't want is for your boat to heel over in a gust. This is not only with the changes in the sails that you make by easing mainsail and jib and whatnot, but you want the rig to work for you. So again, if you were a 250 kilo person going upwind, you might have the D1 here, again, quite tight relative to the cap shroud, and then that would allow the top of the mast to fall out through here. Or if you loosened up the D1 here and tightened up the cap shroud here, you would end up with a mast that would fall off like that. And that would be for a more of a heavier crew. The main purpose of the gooseneck wires through here is to allow for you to vang sheet as much as you like without overbending the mast. And by overbend, I mean in a profile view, if this is a SB20 mainsail, again, here's a spreader, here's the gooseneck wires. And so if you overbend, I'm not sure if you watched the last show with the last session with Andrew, but there was a classic photo of massive creases coming from this part of the mast here through to the clew of the boom. And what that does is it actually takes shape out of this part of the mainsail. So if you have these, number 1 and number 2, too loose, the mast will bend like this. The sail might be designed like this. And so you're bending more than what the sail is designed to do. And so that effectively not only gives you creases through this area here, but what it actually mainly does is it actually takes shape out of the sail through here. And that means that you keep trying to sheet tighter and tighter to get the sail to set because it keeps flapping. Whereas in actual fact, if you tightened up here and here to bring the mast straighter to get back to the luff curve in the mainsail, or let the back stay off to straighten the mast up, that would put that shape back in this area here and set the sail, and all of a sudden you'd be having no leeway and you'd be having positive helm again. Andrew?
Yeah, I'll just add to that because it sort of dovetails into what we were saying a bit last week too, where it's not only I think that one thing that you see too is that if you encourage bend in the bottom of the mast tube by having those lowers and the gooseneck diagonals too loose, the mast will bend a lot fore and aft in the bottom, and what it tends to do is actually straighten up in the top. And so what you end up with a result that you have a flat bottom on the main and you still got the depth in the head, and that's actually the opposite thing of what we're actually looking for to lower the center of effort in the sail. What we prefer to do is actually, have a bit more control of the bottom of the mast, so that we've got a little bit of depth there, because that's going to give you something, it'll help with your pointing there. But we want to have the top of the mast as reactive as possible. So having a little bit of, the control in the bottom will actually move that bend point further up, even fore and aft. So it all works in your favour to not have those lowers too loose.
Yeah, correct. So what basically, if I draw it out here, if this is a mast section, say, because again, excuse my drawing, but here's the spreader, here's the spreaders here, here's the lowers, here's the gooseneck wires, and here's the eye point here and the backstay here. So what Andrew is saying basically is, if you pull on backstay with, let's say it's random, let's forget the tension on here, but let's say you pull on backstay and the mast loads up against the lower, the gooseneck wire and the lower. And once it hits there, it can't go any further, because this distance between here and here is actually quite short. So it'll stop there, and then it will start to bend like this. But if you were to wind the lower and the gooseneck wire on more, then the mast would actually come through here, but more importantly, it would bend like this. Or if you were to let them off on the other side of the coin, this distance between the eye point and the top of the mast would straighten, and this distance between a straight line between the tack, the bottom of the mast and the spreaders would bend. So I think what you're saying, Andrew, is that basically when we pull the backstay on, totally dependent on how much we do this, it can move. I think on an SB20, I think it can move the maximum bend. So if this is a curve of a mast, I think it can move the maximum bend from, say, maybe 1/3 from the top, maybe to like halfway. What do you think?
Yeah, the backstay tends to bend the mast more in the top. And so, again, this is a good point about, like Darren was saying with the mainsails. When you see differences from one main to another, probably the biggest thing is when it manifests in a difference in the vertical depth. So if you've got a main that's actually quite deep in the bottom compared to the top, you might actually want the bottom to bend. And so that's where, again, you can play a little bit with those D1s, pressure to control whether your mast is going to bend more in the top than the bottom. And, conversely, if you've got a flat bottom on your mainsail and a deep top, well, then, you'll tend to favour having those lower, controls restricting your fore and aft bend down low, so that you're getting more reaction in the top of the mast to flatten off the top of the mainsail.
Let's talk about. Sorry, go, Jane.
Just a question on the chat, and I'm not quite sure whether you just partly answered this, but would you ever have the D1 tighter, D1s tighter than the caps?
No.
No?
No. No. And I'll tell you something about that, actually. I'll just switch over to that. Again, the boat's got a massive issue where the cap shrouds are seriously under-specced, and it's the biggest thing that makes the biggest difference to how you may be able to point, how much power you have in the boat and whatnot. So let's just switch back to light to moderate air. Let's say we've got a straight mast where I'll get rid of the gooseneck wires, but let's say you got a straight mast, so the tension on the lowers and the caps is fairly similar, or there's more tension on the caps, but let's say the lower tension is less enough so that the mast is dead straight. And one thing, a little trick in these boats, and any boat for that matter, that where the cap shroud, where either the spreader length, so this distance here, if you took a straight line through there, so that distance there is too low, or the cap shroud is too stretchy. One little trick is to power the boat up in the lighter air, is to, what happens with the lowers is that when the windward lower and the leeward lower is of the same tension, it affects the prebend. When the windward lower when the leeward lower, is soft, it affects more the sideways bend. So when you've got like basically the windward lower and the leeward lower tight in the heavier breezes, and when you've got a little bit of mast bend, it'll help you deal with the mast bend like so when the lowers are coming off here. But the leeward lower, but for that to predominantly happen, the leeward lower needs to also be tight. When the leeward lower is loose, the windward lower predominantly, and I would say 70-30, acts as an athwartship tool. So it's either so if you have the windward lower quite firm, this one here, and the cap shroud, this one here, quite soft, the mast could look like this. If you have the cap shroud quite tight and the windward lower quite loose, but the leeward lower is still loose, the mast could look like this. And for me, especially in conditions where you're trying to get heel angle on and power in the boat, we all like to see the mast look like this, with this being the windward side. So here's our spreader, here's our cap shroud, and here's our lower. And what this does is it really powers up the rig in a way that it deepens the main slut, rounds the back leach up, gives you some bite to steer to, gives you some rudder angle, but the most important thing, it gives you heel angle. And what happens, why I like this a little bit, is because what happens when you've got a stretchy cap shroud is that the distance between here and here needs to get longer before the cap shroud, before the sag comes out of the rig. So if you've got a straight mast in the same conditions like this, then it's very easy for the mast to bend around this point here when the cap shroud here stretches. And so then it's very quickly that this happens. So you lose power quite quickly. Whereas if you've got a measurement from here to here, let's say this is 2 meters from here to here, but in the straight line, that distance there is like maybe 15 mil shorter or 10 mil shorter, then this cap shroud here has to stretch 10 millimeters or 15 millimeters or something before the mast will go straight. So you're always going to be carrying more power than this guy here. Andrew?
Yeah, I totally agree. So to go back to that question though, like for sure, if you were a super light team and you had a super deep sort of middle on your mainsail, and there's no way that you could actually get the get that middle of the sail flat enough, that might be the only occasion when you might try to get a little, promote a little more side bend, because that will flatten out the middle of the sail. But again, it really comes down to where you are and where you're trying to go with your sail shape.
Just need to unmute you there. There we go.
Yeah, got you. The whole goal, I think, you talk about powering up and being overpowered, and it all happens quite quickly in SB20. But the whole goal was to set up your mast so that when you're going upwind, and this is the spreader here, when you're going upwind, you need the tiniest bit of depth in this area here, so that preferably that top batten can actually invert. So it actually comes back the opposite way, and that would be to windward. And all you need to make sure that you don't deload the rudder so that the guy's not steering all over the place is to have, I can't forget the battens, but basically you should be working on this area of the mainsail here. And as long as that part of the sail doesn't flap, then you'll sail with a consistent rudder angle and a consistent heel angle. So the goal again for the main sheet trimmer is to have this area of the sail here, when you're overpowered, inverted, and this might flap a little bit through this area here, but this area of the sail should always, maybe pretty much across here, should always be set in there, like never not set. If this area of the sail is not set, then you're going to be going sideways and not forward. It's a double whammy.
Neither of that sounds good.
I've got a question there, if I may, there, Jane, to Twirler.
Yeah.
Twirler, just looking at the rigs and what you're talking about, the bend in the mast, most of the rigs that are here in Hobart, and most probably a lot of them around the world, are older rigs and tend to be a little bit softer as compared to the new ones. How would you handle the difference between talking about how to tweak up a new rig when you start talking about some very high figures on your cap shrouds and lowers? What about the people who have got softer masts? How would they handle their rigs? Any different to a stiffer rig?
Yeah, for sure. I think you can actually carry maybe a little softer cap tension just to get the mast working for you, but it means that the lowers and the gooseneck wires are going to come more into play. So that's for a new rig, and then for the softer rigs, it would be the opposite. I would think that you would be carrying a little more cap shroud tension, and then hopefully, if you could deal with the 4.5 bend, or maybe you wouldn't bang sheet so much, you would carry a little firmer, a little softer, lower and gooseneck wire tension. We just set up a new rig on Brett's boat for the nationals and stuff, and I mean, apart from the bedding in of the shrouds and whatnot, the biggest difference was that we carried pretty much zero tension on the on those stupid wires up the top, the jumper wires, you know. Like nearly zero. Like, in my opinion, you could take those top spreaders and those wires off. You never use them. Like, we don't use them upwind, don't use them downwind. I mean, downwind, they take a bit of load and stuff, but like, I mean, you're never going to break the rig. So for me, that's why I haven't brought those into it, because for me, I think they're irrelevant.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Nick? What's your take on what Darren just said?
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, like, we have zero tension on our uppers, and you know, I've often thought about it, especially when you see the French guys during the Worlds climbing up the mast and playing around with there up there. And I'm like, what the devil are they doing up there? And I tell you what, the question's been asked several times and we never really got an answer. You know, I reckon they were just psyching us out. I'm sure.
Yeah.
I can see we've got Ed Russo online, and I'm putting you on the spot here, Ed, and feel free to not answer. But what's your take on that from a French perspective, or from a European perspective, or even just from the perspective of your own boat, Ed? You able to share your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for holding this this clinic. It's very interesting. I haven't had a chance to participate in the others, and I had to drop off for a few minutes for a call. But this is very interesting, and I appreciate the time that everybody's putting into this. Yeah, the adjustments on the uppers. I mean, we've always felt that if you don't have tension on the uppers, you're going to bring down the mast. Because when it loads up above about 18 knots, and the mast will start to bend forward, and we think that once the mast bends forward, it's not supposed to be bending forward, and it reaches a critical breaking point. So one of the main reasons that it's adjusted the uppers is to protect us from breaking when the wind picks up. So no, it's not, and it's not for psychological reasons that we did it, Jeff.
So here's something for you, Ed. In respect to going downwind in breeze, and again, I say I still think you can get rid of them, but it's actually quite fast to go downwind in load, in my opinion, with backstay on still. So I would hardly ever let the backstay off. And I'll tell you what, the reason why is because it shortens the luff length of the spinnaker and increases twist. And when it's blowing dogs off chains, you've got bow up and you're trying to, and basically the more twist you have, the faster you go. So backstay on downwind in a breeze does two things. One is it flattens the top of the mainsail out so the mainsail can do the same thing. But two, it shortens the luff length of the mainsail again to allow the spinnaker to twist, So it allows the spinnaker to twist when you ease. If you've got the luff length, if you've got the distance between the top of the mast and the end of the bow pole too short, it makes the luff length of the spinnaker too long, and then you start to ease and it won't open up as much. So your acceleration is less. And so countering what you were just saying, I 100% agree with what you're saying if you let the backstay off, but I don't think it's actually fast to let the backstay off in conditions where you could potentially break the mast. What do you think, Ed?
Yes, I agree, Darren, completely with that, because yeah, in the big wind, we never take the backstay. I mean, we ease it off a little bit, but essentially it's on, especially when it's blowing cats and dogs, we have it on about 80 to 90% from where we would on going upwind. So you're right. So yeah, so easing it off and running the risk of breaking the mast is not really applicable, but sometimes you do forget, sometimes it comes off, and if you do for some reason have the backstay off when it's blowing hard, then the mast inverts, and that's the easy way to break it down. So, but I agree completely with your position going downwind in the wind. It's better to have your backstay on.
Twirler, what about spread boats? How does that come into the equation?
Yeah, so it's perfect timing. So another thing in respect to setting up the boat, and all these things I'm talking about is just knowing why you might be asymmetric in your setup, why sometimes the port tack's flatter than the starboard tack or whatnot. But this is another thing that we really don't have control of. And if you look from the top of the mast in plan view, so this is the rig here, and this is the spreader here, and the spreader here. So when we talk about spreader poke, what Andy was just talking about, we talk about the distance between here and here. When we talk about spreader rake, I like to, it's basically the angle through here like this. And so what has been a beneficiary for me is that if this was your forestay, say here, what's quite worthwhile, because again, you don't get a choice. So spreader poke, if the spreader is here, like this, the mast will be straighter because the spreaders are forward and the cap shroud tension will actually, because this is locked in here and here, the cap shroud tension will bring the mast, say, to here. If the spreader poke is like this, so it's more, it'll pre-bend the rig once you load the cap shrouds up, so the mast will end up here. But more importantly, for symmetry, the biggest issue is if, just bear with me 1 second here. More importantly, if this is the mast here and this is the spreaders, again, this is the poke. But more importantly, if you measured your spreader tip from here and then measured your spreader tip from here, so 1 and 2, so then we can figure out if the spreaders are actually symmetric. And what happens now is if this distance here, say, is, let's say 2 meters, and let's say this is 1.95. So there's 50 millimeters difference between port tack and starboard tack. So so that means that this spreader here is effectively like this, and this spreader here is like this, exaggerated. And so then what happens on port tack, you are going to be sailing with a mast that's that wants to go to here, and on starboard tack, you're going to be sailing with a mast that wants to go to here. And I think if you can understand all this stuff when you're setting your boat up, you get a new boat or whatever the case might be, or you've been out there, I'm sure everyone's been out there and they've gone, God damn, the mainsail flaps this tack, it doesn't the other tack. I got to let backstay off this tack and not this tack. I can't use as much vang. You know, this could be one of the reasons why. And for me, understanding the asymmetries in the rig, even if you can't fix them, it takes out the frustration with trying to counter the changes with too much shroud tension change. You know, sometimes you might just want to deal with it, but at least if you measure it, you'll know what the differences are. And I think it's quite important to know where all this sort of stuff, I think it's quite important to know all this sort of stuff just so that, oh, now I can't get out again. Oh, Jane, help me. How do I get out of this whiteboard? There you go. I think it's quite important to know any asymmetries in your boat, you know, like whether the keel's off to one side or the rudder's off to one side or whatnot, because it takes the frustration out of trying to fix something that you know you can't fix. And then you can either, you can do two things. One, you can deal with it, or two, you can fix it another way. And I guess it all comes back to knowing, you know, how to make your boat symmetric, knowing to measure everything up, and knowing what to do when at the right time, knowing that there's asymmetries through the whole process, you know. Andrew?
Sorry, I was just going to say, Darren, is this something that we, and I haven't missed your point, but everyone who's sailing SB20 should be doing this measurement? Because I think one of the questions we've had was, you know, what are the common things that people in the middle or the back of the fleet are doing wrong that you could easily remedy? But how important is this to every boat that's on the water?
Well, I think when you're trying to push to the nth level, and I think that, you know, like this all came when I first started sailing SB20s. I went out in the boat as it was, and it was like, oh my God, like it was a disaster. You know, like, I mean, this was there and this was there and nothing was the same and nothing set up the same. And I was going, God, how can I sail this boat, you know, from one tack to the other and try and get some sort of consistency going? And then it was just straight away. It was like, come back in and go, okay, well, let's just measure everything up. And I guess my point is that I'm sure that everyone's been through the same problems. I mean, Nick, you might be able to pipe in here. I'm sure you've seen asymmetry and stuff and gone, okay, why this is happening and what have you gone to do to fix it, you know?
Yeah, I know. I talked to you about it once before, and you were very good and helped me out on some different things. But just sort of going on a little bit about for those who might find it a little bit difficult to work out whether their spreaders are in line. It's the most important thing is to try and get the whole picture. In other words, you've got to start from the bottom, getting the keel, making sure the keel's right and the rudder all lines up all the way up to your cap shrouds, up to your chain plates, making sure those measurements are correct. And then you've got to make sure that your actual spreaders are sitting on the mast correctly. Now, one of the things I did with all the brand new boats that came in, and I rigged up every one, they all came in, believe it or not, at 390 millimetres of poke, which I was quite surprised. And but a lot of the older boats are all over the place. So maybe if people were looking at their spreaders, that would be where I'd be looking at, is making sure your spreaders line up on the mast. The other good thing about if you put the boat, say for instance, you've got it in the boat park, you've got your mast set up, you've got your rig tension on, and you look at your mast and you look sideways and you look at the actual cap shrouds. And if the cap shroud line up all the way through, right up to the spreader, well, you know you're pretty well got the mast in line. If one is, if one of the wires are poking out to one side, well, then you've got to ease your rig off and fiddle around a little bit, maybe give the mast a bit of a shake. Sometimes that works. And if it doesn't come out, that means you've most probably got a problem with your spreaders.
Thanks, Nick. I was just going to say, Andrew, Andy, we had a couple of questions, I think, come through in the week. Have you had a bit of a look at those? I think some might have been answered in part, but maybe some of the earlier questions for Twirler there, have they been answered?
Yeah, I've got them here.
The mode one, Twirler, might be helpful.
There's a few. So I think we've been over it, like some of the ones, the recent ones here, like, is it important to have the keel, rudder and rig centered? Like, you've got no idea how important that is, for me especially. And again, it just makes you able to know that you are, that one time if you're slow on starboard tack in a race versus port tack, that you know that it's not the rig, not the sail, not the keel, it's the way you're setting up. Maybe there's a bit of wind shear, you know, all that sort of stuff. And so you can adjust then your sail trim and potentially a little bit of rig set up to suit if it's consistently happening all the time. But to know that everything's centered, in line, in column, symmetric is super, super important. Just to have peace of mind to know that, again, you can adjust your sail trim to make it symmetric, you know, and it could be a case of going, okay, well, we've got like 10 degrees of right wind shear on one tack than the other, but you wouldn't know that if your boat was asymmetric, if that makes sense.
So just Twirler, just on another variant, and perhaps Andrew as well, the difference between a high mode and a low mode. What are you doing to the rig and the sails to get those two?
You go, Darren.
So let's say, for instance, you wanted to live off a guy's hip. Like for me, the first thing I want to do is increase the heel angle and round the back of the sails up. So there's two things that the backstay does. One is that it deepens the mainsail up, but it also sags the forestay, and that in turn rounds and gives you more return on the leach of the jib. And those two things alone make the boat here. It gives a little bit of rudder angle to the guy on the helm, which is the main thing, because the worst thing when you're trying to hold a lane is if the guy on the helm has no rudder angle. Like, it's the single worst thing. And as a main sheet trimmer, the first thing I always do is look at the guy steering and see how much rudder angle he's got. And so if I want to sail X mode fast, or let's say I want to sail fast, if you're just overlaid the top mark, I would invert the mainsail. Like, I would actually overbend the mast, as we were discussing before, so that mast bent more than what the luff curve allowed. And I would nearly flap the back of the mainsail so that the guy on the helm had a straight rudder. And it just makes the boat go fast through the water. You know, you can set the bottom leach of the mainsail a little bit every now and again, but for the most part, you know, this is in pressure, obviously, or in a bit, you know, when you're sailing to max heel angle. And then, and that makes the boat go fast through the water. On the other side of the coin, if you, for instance, wanted to sail a high mode into a top mark because someone lee bowed you, or the breeze shifted left, you're on starboard late on the breeze shifted left, and all of a sudden you needed to lay, then it's the opposite. You let the backstay off, trav up, get the boom centered, and then sheet the mainsail on so that it gives bite in the back of the two sails. And the back of the two sails then in turn give bite to the guy on the helm, and the boat will sail. You just got to be a little bit careful with your speed. Like, I never liked, like, let's say you're doing 5, 8, and we wanted to go into a high mode, I would say, okay, let's go 5, 4 to 5, 5, and then ease the backstay, let the sails round up, increase the heel angle, increase the rudder angle, and let the boat do its work. It's not good VMG, but it will get you up around a mark or let you hold a lane until the next shift comes, etc.
Okay, I think that covered the second question about sailing in dirty air, which is a nice crossover. Just over to Nick. You're known as one of the best mode sailors about. Is that time the way you think, or is it, what are you feeling when you're doing that amazing climb off the start line that you're known for doing? Nick?
Oh, sorry, you're talking to me. I thought you were talking to Twirler. Just ask the question again, sorry, Andrew.
Just hearing what Twirler said about going into high mode, is that concur with the way you do business when you've known to be able to climb highly whenever you want to? Is that how you're going about it, or is there, how are you interacting, say, with your forward hand to get that to happen?
Yeah, no, exactly the same. Yeah, no, it's good. It's so important to have guys, people on board the boat that understand what you want to do, and when you say, listen, that's what we want to do, we want to go into high mode, they know what to do, and it makes so much difference. Difficult when you have somebody who's most probably not as experienced, and you've got to actually start to show them what to do. It makes it a little bit hard. I feel for a lot of people who you know, are battling to try and get out there and learn how to do this. So it's great that Twirler's come up with all of this. That's great. Good on you, mate.
Sorry, can I just add? The only way you're going to really learn how to sail modes best is actually to have another boat that's also just as keen to learn how to sail modes. And you just go out there and practice. You know, you have one boat sail, what would be a normal VMG, and then the other boat, you know, if they want to do a high mode, they'll actually start off on that boat's hip, and just play. You know, they can. You know, if you know the theory, you can put it into practice, and just the only way you're going to get it is just to practice. You know, you're not going to. There's no textbook that's going to you know, give you that magic height when you want it, or the magic speed when you want it. It's just a matter that unless you practice it, you won't get it.
Okay, Twirler, there was a couple of questions, and I'm just conscious of the time. We're just getting past 8 o'clock, but how you set your rig up at the base, I think we've probably covered that one tonight. Andy, do you think?
Yeah, no, I think we've done rig well. That's good.
And the ratio you use to step up and step down through the wind range. Just unmuting you there, Twirler.
I don't think he's locked up.
We've lost him there for us.
Oh, here he is.
Okay, I'm here. Just bear with me 1 sec. I'll just I had that up at the last meeting. I'll just typically, and it doesn't have to be this way, but typically, just refreshing my memory here. So, like, I would go through probably 15 turns on the caps and 9 turns on the D1s and 2 turns on the Gooseneck Shrouds.
What sort of steps are you going through to get there during a race or before a race? Like
It's probably 2/3, 1/3 in favour of the caps. And then when you go downrange, again, I'm just refreshing my memory here. When you go downrange, actually the lowest settings, more D1 off than cap off. When you go, one thing is with the rig is you can actually get too soft. And so it's important to then control the side bend of the rig with the diagonals, but to keep the cap shroud tension so the leeward cap never goes soft. It makes a big difference. So just when
you have that, say, a 5-knot change in wind strength, is that like quite a few turns, or you do it incrementally but working your way through?
Oh no, Matt. Oh, well, I change every knot pretty well, like every 2 knots minimum. You know, again, it goes like, I mean, my guide that I use as a general rule of thumb, as I said, like it's 15 turns on the caps, and like I've got every 2 knots there, but you know, like, I mean, it's just a feel thing. I think the most important thing that anyone can do is to make sure that they have a repeatable setup. It doesn't matter whether it's in 5 knots, 10 knots, 20 knots, 15 knots, whatever, as long as they can go back to it. And as long as when they leave the dock, they know where they are. So let's call it a base setting, and your base setting can be at any wind speed, doesn't matter what it is, as long as you know roughly the turns up and down that you would go from that base setting as the wind speed increased or decreased. And
how are you keeping track of that?
Of the turns?
Yes.
Counting.
Right,
so what I do is actually so I measure between the studs at base measurement, so I can always go back to base. But sometimes you do get a little bit hurry-curry, and so it's quite good to have, if you have a basic rig guide, like you have 3 changes or 5 changes or 6 changes or 1 change or whatever it might be, that you measure the change distance as well. So if you ever get caught out and you're going, oh my God, they've called the start and we've got to go, and old mate's turning and he's all frantic and all that sort of stuff, you can get a measurement tool when you come back for the next race, for example, or even during the race for that matter, and measure the stud, the distance between the 2 turnbuckle studs. And so then you can cross-reference that against something that says 2 turns up, 3 turns up, 4 turns up, or 5 turns down, or whatever, and know where you are. And then you know straight away, okay, I'm a little bit looser on port than starboard, or I know I'm symmetric, I was okay, like I did a good job, or you know, whatever it might be.
Yeah, actually, can I continue on with that?
Yeah, go.
Have we got time?
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's always difficult to try and remember how many turns you've taken off and put on, and usually when you get back to the dock and you've checked them, you think, God blimey, what are those? All over the place. So what I've got is on the side, each side of the side tanks, I've got VDL in big letters, And when I go out at my dock settings, so I know what they are. I know what the measurement is between the chain plates, which are already set. And so when I change something, or sorry, my forward hand or main hand does the change, they will mark down with Chinograph next to the D a stroke, which would be 1 or 2 or 3. Now, on the forward side of the VDLs is the pluses, and on the after side of the VDLs is the minuses. So say for instance, on the Ds, you go up 4 turns, and then you might decide, I better take a few off, take a couple off. So all you do is just put a stroke through 2 of them. So you've still got 2 pluses. And then if you do that every time, you won't get confused and won't get lost. And if you are doing it differently to the other side, you've got it on the other side tank, you know, so for instance, the conditions might be slightly different and you've got your setup slightly different for that side, then you know that where you are all the time. And then when you go back to the start of your next race, you can either go back to your dock settings and restart again, or you can just continue on.
Great.
Okay. Look, I'm just conscious of the time, and I think we're probably coming to the end tonight. But were there any other final comments or any final questions from the audience online? If you could either just unmute yourself and ask the question directly, we'd be happy to do that. And Andrew, Darren, and Nick, have you got any final comments tonight?
Well, I'd just like to. I'd like to finish off to everyone and like everyone who sails an SB20, whether they be, you know, 15 years old or 50 years old, you know, they've all got some seriously good sailing experience. But I think it's some people I see hop in it and it's like a sort of a set and forget keel boat, but it's not, you know, like, I mean, that's why the good guys are consistently at the front. You know, and someone may or may not struggle through the back of the fleet. So I think that the point for me of tonight would be to make sure that everyone understands that it's not the fault of anyone, but the boats are all different. And, you know, you should take out of it more than anything is to get the feel back in your bum again, like you had when you were sailing a Sabo or a international cadet or something, and use it, you know, because it's the best way that you can get back up to the front of the fleet again if you're not there already, and certainly be open-minded and use your eyes and again the feel that you've got there to try and, you know, make things good and bad or better and worse or whatever it might be. Because when you go, rest assured that when you go and get your next set of sails or your next mast or your next boat or whatever, that it's going to be different again. And don't be closed-minded that you have to start on the same numbers as you were in the last one because it was fast. The new setup will be just as fast, but you just got to start thinking about the process and how to make things look the same.
Thanks, Darren. Very wise words. Andrew, have you got any final comments to the audience tonight?
Yeah, just probably add also, if you can find yourself a good tuning buddy, it makes a world of difference, you know, whether you're just doing club racing or you're going into a Worlds or whatever. If you've got another team who you're, you know, comfortable to, you know, to both sort of set up next to each other and, you know, don't just try and, you know, blow each other off, but actually just use, you know, like, you know, 3 or 4 minutes of just straight line sailing, you know, prior to each race to just to dial all your settings in. That'll give you like a huge advantage. So and it's good fun too, you know, like it's just a great way to learn about, you know, to just keep leapfrogging your performance from you know, from day to day. So.
Thanks, Andrew. I think, Scott, that might be something we might need to do a little bit more of when we get back onto the water. I think there'll be a few people keen to be doing that. Nick, any final comments from you tonight?
Yeah, I think we tend to forget about our crew, our dear crew. You know, like they work so hard. No, it's so important to look after your crew. I'm a great believer a champion team will always beat a team of champions. So, you know, if you've got a good crew, look after them. Make sure you don't give them a hard time on the water because they get sick of it and move on. And that's what really makes you quick, is having a really good bunch of people around you. And the longer you sail together, the better you get.
Thanks very much, Nick. Well, that's it tonight. Thanks very much for joining us online, and thanks so much to our panel, Andrew Lechte, Darren Jones, Twirler and Nick Rogers. We really appreciate the amount of time, particularly Darren and Andrew, for the previous session that you've put in and the thoroughness with which you're approaching supporting the development of the class. So we're really appreciative of that, and we hope we can all be out on boats sooner rather than later and actually having a fun time. So we really appreciate the wisdom and also the generosity of you sharing the information. So don't forget, if you've missed our previous sessions, the SB20 Australia YouTube channel has all the recorded sessions on there. The link for last week's slides or last fortnight's slides from Andrew is also posted on Facebook. And if you're having trouble with that, and Instagram, but if you're having trouble with that, just shoot me an email just to sb20australia@gmail.com. Our next session is going to focus on boat preparation. So we're creeping up on we've got everything crossed, but creeping up on the start of the season in early October in Australia. So boat preparation, we'll have Nick Rogers rejoining us. Nick is, has an enviable reputation for being very, very pedantic about his boat prep and very methodical about it. So I think we'll all work through that. And he's also going to be joined by one of our regulars online, Andrew Smith. I know Andrew's been on tonight. Andrew took 3rd place in the World Championship in here in France only last year. And Andrew does acknowledge that that's one of the areas that he's been improving on himself, is his boat preparation, and he's really keen to talk to us about that. And we also have Felicity Allison from Cook Your Own Dinner, one of the co-owners of Cook Your Own Dinner, coming on to that panel as well. We're also hoping that Andrew might shed a little bit of light on how some of the European teams are preparing their boats before and during World Championship events. And Ed and Jan, if you're online again next time, perhaps you can share some thoughts as well. It's a strange world we live in. COVID-19 is obviously having a major impact on all of us, particularly our friends in Victoria, New South Wales, and obviously in Europe as well. So please, everyone, stay safe, look after yourselves. We'll see you again in a fortnight. Thanks again.